Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is WHU Otto Beisheim School of Management. My name is Markus Rudolf. I'm the Dean of the school and I'm a Professor of Finance. And I would like to introduce you to the basics of some cryptocurrencies, namely Bitcoin and Ether, as two examples of the very big and huge world of cryptocurrencies. The classical model of payment, a fiat money-based payment system, is based on an intermediary. So we always have a transaction which is cleared by an intermediary which is right in the middle of all partners in the transaction. So in other words, when you convert money, when you transfer money from Germany to France, for instance, then the amount is going to be cleared by the European Central Bank system. So therefore, fiat money currencies, so classical currencies, are currencies which are based on three parties. So you always have the buyer, the seller, and the intermediary in between. The intermediary can be a bank or a clearing institution if we deal with credit cards. At least we always need three parties. And the question of whether the system is working depends on the amount of trust that the people have in the clearing institution. So in other words, if we have people here like Ignaz interacting with Tim, then the interaction goes above that financial intermediary, and both Ignaz and Tim basically trust in that clearing institution in the way that they don't think that the clearing institution is going to escape with the money. So if you have a euro bill, for instance, then you know that this euro bill is worth something in real terms, even though you know that the paper itself is not worth very much. But you trust in the value of the currency because you trust into the European Central Bank. This intermediary-based currency system is comparatively complicated because you need three parties, you need a clearing institution, you need time in order to clear the payment, and it is non-digital in the end. Now, in the beginning of the 0 years of this century, people started to think about digital currencies. And one of the most influential papers, which was written by Satoshi Nakamoto in the year 2008. This is a very interesting paper because this is the invention of bitcoins. Bitcoins are the most commonly used cryptocurrencies which we have. The paper is quite remarkable because Satoshi Nakamoto is a person which nobody really knows. The name Satoshi Nakamoto probably is not associated to any person. So in other words, we don't know exactly who has written the paper. Nevertheless, it is the basis for forming bitcoins as cryptocurrencies. The idea of cryptocurrencies is completely different from the idea of fiat money transactions. If you look at that chart here, basically, you have a network of people who are participating in that cryptocurrency network, namely Ignaz, Kia, Sabrina, Tim, Marcus, all of those people are participating in the network, and you don't have a clearing institution. So it's not so that Ignaz is selling something to Tim and that Ignaz basically does this transaction based on the trust that he has with regard to the clearing institution. It is completely differently. Namely, it is a so-called peer-to-peer network. So we have a peer-to-peer network which basically says that a transaction which is taking place in that network is absolutely transparent. So in other words, everybody in the network can see that Ignaz and Tim are interacting with each other, but all of the people basically can see that transaction. So in other words, the justification of the transaction does not come based on the confirmation of the intermediary. It comes based on the confirmation of everybody who is part of the network. It's a peer-to-peer network, and everybody in there basically has the chance to confirm that the transaction is valid or invalid. So when is such a transaction invalid? Well, in the case of a digital currency, it's quite obviously so that you don't have a monetary coin, you don't have a monetary bill. You only have some bits which are shifted over across the computer network. So therefore, you have one thing which is called to be the double spending problem. So any currency, every Bitcoin could be spent twice. And it's absolutely clear that a Bitcoin which was already spent cannot be spent a second time. So therefore what you need is you need an unambiguous identification of that Bitcoin, and you need the judgment of everybody who is part of that network who confirms that this particular Bitcoin has already been spent or has not been spent so far, so that the transaction is going to be valid. So therefore, what we have in the case of digital currencies is we have a website where everybody can see which transaction is currently taking place. And a transaction is only valid if everybody in the network is confirming that transaction. Now the question which arises is, why should people want to confirm the transaction? Because that is associated to a certain amount of effort. And the answer is, everybody gets a reward who is confirming the transaction. And the reward is paid out in new digital currencies, in new Bitcoins. So what we have here is, we do have an electronic network of coins which is a chain of digital signatures. So in other words, Ignaz is selling something to Kia, Kia is something to Sabrina, Sabrina is selling something to Tim, and Tim is selling something to Markus. And each of those transactions is signed by the respective digital signatures. So if you are in a network and everybody knows what you are currently buying or selling, then we have a situation which many people might feel uncomfortable with. So therefore, this signature, this confirmation is not done based on a clear name of the people, but based on a cryptographic hash code of those people. So in other words, what you find in the network is not the name Ignaz. You find a cryptographic hash code for Ignaz in such a way that it is absolutely clear that Ignaz can be easily translated into the hash. But at the same time, it is very difficult, if not impossible, to deduct back whether this hash is associated to Ignaz or to somebody else. So this is cryptography, which basically makes sure that we can translate a clear name and a clear text into a code, but we cannot translate back the code into a clear name. Now, in order to get a little imagination about that, let us firstly go through the most important cryptocurrencies that we have. At the moment, the most important cryptocurrency is called Bitcoin, and it makes up 7.74% of the entire market in cryptocurrencies. By the end of February 2018, the price of Bitcoins was a little bit more than $10,000. The next most important cryptocurrency is called Ether. Respectively, the platform on which Ether is created and traded is called Ethereum, which is the second most important currency. There's a very important difference between Bitcoin and Ethereum, because Bitcoin is based on a script language, whereas Ethereum is based on so-called smart contracts. So Ethereum is very much more flexible than Bitcoin. However, Bitcoin is the oldest cryptocurrency that we have, and it is widest spread. And then we have many other different cryptocurrencies. There are many of them. Ripple is one, Bitcoin Cash, Litecoin, Cardano, Neo, Stellar, EOS. So there are many different cryptocurrencies available, and you can use them for many purposes. Now, in order to get an imagination how that works, such a transaction, I would like to invite you to go to blockchain.info. And what you see here is, you see so-called blocks. Each of those blocks basically summarizes a certain number of transactions. So here the first block, for instance, namely the block number 514,540, is a block which summarizes 1,261 transactions. And the amount of money which was transacted in that block is 3,744 Bitcoins. Now, if we go into that block, we can see all of the transactions which were taking place here. So if you scroll down the menu, then you see all of the transactions which have been taking place here. As I said earlier, there are 1,261 transactions summarized. So if you take this transaction here, for instance, then we do see this transaction here, that there is somebody who has transferred Bitcoins to somebody else. The name of this somebody is 1MQTWY and so on. So this is the cryptographic code of the person who has transferred Bitcoins to the other one. So the question the question is, and it's very important to understand how this cryptography is really working. So if you want to understand why cryptocurrencies are absolutely safe, we have to understand how the cryptography is working, how we translate a clear name, a clear text into a cryptographic code. So if we look at the block here, so again, this is a block with the number 514540. So in other words, that is the 500,000th block after the initiation of Bitcoins. This block was basically created on the 21st of March 2018 at 2:39 p.m. We can also see that the transaction volume was 3,744 Bitcoins. We have seen that there are 1,261 transactions, either at coffee shops or at ATMs or at printing shops have been taking place, and they are summarized there. And one thing which is quite important is the nonce, because the nonce basically has something to do with the cryptographic hash code. We see the hash code of the total transaction here on the right hand side. So you see that we have a hash code which is starting with a number of zeros. So we have a number of zeros in the beginning, and then we have 1, 4, D, 9, and so on. This cryptographic hash code is nothing else but a hexadecimal code. So in other words, it's a hexadecimal number which basically translates a binary number into a hexadecimal code. If you count the number of digits here, it's 64. We have 64 digits, which basically coincides with a binary code of 256, because each binary number, because each hexadecimal number has to be replaced and represented by a 4 digits binary number. So therefore we have 64 digits here, and the codification is called 256 hash code. 256 because we are talking about a binary code with 256 digits. So this is basically what we see. This is what we see here in that block. It's quite important that a block is consistent of a number of transactions. And this is simply so because if the more transactions which we have, which are confirmed, the more secure is the entire cryptocurrency. So here we have 1,261 transactions. Each of those transactions has been confirmed by somebody. If we go down to the transactions, then we see that, for instance, the first transaction was confirmed by somebody with this name, 97D1 and so on. And the person got a reward for that. Namely, the person got basically 0.75 satoshis. Satoshi is the small part of Bitcoin. So we have Bitcoin as the currency, and then we have small satoshis. We summarize transactions into blocks, and this in each block is confirmed by a cryptographic hash code. And once the block is closed by a so-called miner, once the block is closed by a miner, the next block is going to be opened for new transactions. A miner is somebody who is confirming each and all of the transactions which are summarized here. So in our block, basically we have 1,261 transactions, and the miner is confirming all of the transactions. Now, in order to make sure that a sufficiently large number of transactions is summarized in one block, we need a little bit of time. Because each transaction, because we are in a digital world, is infinitively fast. So when you want to make sure that not just one transaction is one block, but several transactions is summarized into one block, we need 10 minutes or so in order to have sufficiently many transactions. In fact, a Bitcoin block, in order to create a Bitcoin block that takes exactly 10 minutes, and these 10 minutes here basically summarize a number of transactions. So if you go to the website again, here we see that we now have closed block number 514,540. This summarized 1,261 transactions. Now we have started a new block, and the new block is the block number 514,541. So that's the 541st block, and so far there are 2,223 transactions summarized in there. Now, in order to make sure that the block has sufficient time in order to summarize sufficiently many transactions, we need to basically have a cryptographic puzzle which has to be solved and which takes computing time. So in other words, we need to have the computer calculating something so that the computer needs 10 minutes or so time in order to calculate that, so that the number of transactions which are summarized to one block is more than just 1, 2, or 3, but 2,000 or 1,000. Because again, one block is the more secure, the more transactions are summarized in one block. Now, in order to make sure that the time is long enough, the cryptocurrencies invent a concept which is called the proof of work. The proof of work is a concept which obliges the CPU, the central processing unit of the computer, to waste time, to use time. So the CPU is supposed to basically calculate a puzzle which takes a little bit time until it is going to be calculated. Now, in order to do that, I would like to show you a website which deals with puzzles, with hash puzzles. So for instance, when we want to translate the name WHU into a hash value, we get this number here. Here we don't have a 256 digit, but we have a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 digit hexadecimal number, which basically means that we are talking about a 32-bit hash code, because 8 hexadecimal numbers come together with 32 binary numbers. So, in other words, the translation, the hashing of the name WHU is 72C93AD3. Now, it is very, very complicated to deduct that this code, 72C9 and so on, coincides with WHU. But it's very easy to show that WHU coincides with that hash code. So in other words, once we have decoded WHU into that hash code, nobody can ever figure out that WHU is standing behind that hash code. But at the same time, WHU can prove that this hash code belongs to the name WHU. Now, what you do in order to do the proof of work, you do something in order to use computer time, CPU time. So what you can do is basically you can add WHU by a so-called nonce. So for instance, if you say WHU all, then you get a different code than just WHU. Now the idea is now to find a nonce which is added to WHU such that the first number of the hash code is not a 7 anymore, but a 0. So in other words, if we do that, then we get a new hash code which randomly belongs to WHU1, by the way, because WHU1 has the hash code 0F057A24. That goes very, very quickly. And the computer can easily calculate that. Now, if you require that 2 leading zeros are there, then we see that 0F05 is not the right code for WHU1 anymore. So what we would have to do is we would have to fill in a nonce here in order to figure out what the right hash code is such that we have 2 leading zeros. So we could do that basically by hands, and that would take a very long period of time. Or we could solve the hash puzzle here, and then we see that the code is now 00C483D5. The hash code is 513. In other words, WHU 513 is translated into 00C483D5. 2 leading zeros. Again, as you have seen, that went very, very quickly. Now let's require that we want to have 4 leading zeros. If you want to have 4 leading zeros, you see that it took time. Did you see that it took quite a lot of time? Because 4 leading zeros, it takes very much time, because what the computer has to do is basically, the computer is trying out code for code for code until the computer has found a combination with 4 leading zeros. And if I would now require to have 5 leading zeros, it would take very, very long. So if I require 5 leading zeros, then you see that we wait and wait and wait and wait. And my computer here is maybe incapable to really solving the puzzle. So what we are seeing here is what we call mining. Because the mining plants, which we know to be in China or in Hong Kong, those mining plants are plants consisting of thousands and 10,000s of computer CPUs, which do nothing else but solving these puzzles. As you can see, now we have solved the puzzle, namely 5 leading zeros. We find 5 leading zeros if we complement WHU by 10288830. And then the hash code is 000033E. If I would now try it with 6 leading zeros, I wouldn't get a result anymore with that computer. So what you can see from that is that the computing time increases exponentially with the number of leading zeros that we are requiring. And this is, by the way, exactly how it works with the hashing of Bitcoins. So the proof of work in the case of Bitcoins requires that we find a hash code which refers to that transaction that we do. Namely, which refers to the name of the sender of the money, which refers to the name of the receiver of the money, which describes the good which is sold, and so on. And we require that we have 18 leading zeros. So we have 18 leading zeros in a hexadecimal number consisting of 64 digits. And that takes roughly 10 minutes, at least in the best crypto mining plants in the world. So in China, especially in China, you find a lot of mining plants which use a lot of energy power in order to run all of those computers. And the idea of the proof of work is the one who has basically solved the puzzle first in the world gets a reward for solving the puzzle, which is currently 12.5 bitcoins. If we go back to our blockchain information, then we see if we go into block number 514.541, then we see that the block reward here was 12.5. So 12.5 is the reward for solving the puzzle. The nonce is exactly this code here. So this code has to be added to the block in addition to all of the transactions which are already described in the block, such that we get a hash code with 18 leading zeros. So here we have 18 leading zeros. And what you also can see is that this puzzle has been solved by a company called Slush Pool. So Slush Pool is probably a Chinese mining plant. If you click on it, then we would be able to see what Slush Pool really is. It is a mining plant consisting of thousands or 10,000s of computer terminals which are put together and which only have one purpose, namely solving the hash puzzle such that we find a nonce in addition to the block with yielding 18 leading zeros here in the hash code. Now this is the theoretical background of Bitcoins, but quite practically you also can pay with Bitcoins. So WHU Otto Beisheim School of Management is based in a city close to Koblenz, and if you go to coinmap.org, as you can see it here, you will find everybody who is accepting Bitcoins for the services. So for instance, here in the Altstadt in Koblenz, we have one company called Print and Design Druckerei at Kornfortstraße 1, which is accepting Bitcoin as a measure of payment. And if you look at the entire map, so you can basically increase the scale of the map, then you will find a lot of different companies and shops which accept Bitcoins. For instance, in Cologne, we have 11 Bitcoin acceptors, and one of them is at the Mediapark See, for instance. This is the Flirt University at the Mediapark number 5 in Cologne. So thank you very much for listening. All of the links that I have used can be clicked directly below this video here on the YouTube platform. Thank you very much for listening and hope to see you soon on one of the next occasions.